previously on the Scowl Method podcast. Progressive overload is not necessarily a form of strength training. It's a method in which you train, period. In a general sense, what progressive overload is incremental changes to your workouts, and they have to be somewhat consistent. So consistent incremental changes to your workouts that allow you to progress towards your goals. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Thickback City. I will be your guide for... So let me stop. Listen, I want to talk about my favorite exercises for a thick back, for rather a well-developed back, right? What incentivizing does is it involves offering rewards or benefits to encourage desirable behaviors, right? It's slightly different than just a pure positive reinforcement relationship, right? So you have a behavior, right? Positive reinforcement comes on the back end that says that this behavior is good in efforts to hopefully produce more of that behavior. What incentivizing does is it gets to before the behavior, so it gives the motivation to do the behavior, and then it cap ends it with the positive reinforcement for doing it. That's the incentive. Merry Christmas, everyone. Hopefully you're spending some time with some loved ones, with some close friends, relatives, whatever you want to call it. Hey, look, hopefully this time of year is good for you. And we're headed into the end of the year, which reminds me, look, this is the last podcast of the year. You know, just thinking about it, we started off in July or something like that. So 6 months going on here. Episode 15, right? So it's I sit back and kind of think about it. I'm kind of proud of this feat thus far. But there's still more to go. You know, I'm not going to rest on my laurels or anything like that, but I'm pretty jazzed up about how we've made a little bit of progress in this whole thing, right? So just a couple notes about this episode. We are not going to have a random topic this episode. I think for the quick tip, that's really not that quick anymore. So I'm probably going to change the name of that. And the main topic, I think there's going to be a long enough episode. And I'm trying not to push it all the way out to like an hour and a half or 2 hours of an episode. I'm trying to keep it within an hour. I haven't really done that good of a job with that, but that's the idea here, right? So just a little bit of a recap also on the previous episode 14, we talked about progressive overload. We talked about the idea of punishing or incentivizing. We did the second half of that, the incentivizing side. Let me just backtrack to the progressive overload part, right? Like I really, really wanted to impress upon you that the idea of progressive overload, the principle of progressive overload is applicable to all aspects of your life, right? And it's especially effective in improving your thinking. It's of course a physical fitness idea. That's where it started, right? But I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've used that principle to just think better and to process faster, just in general, right? So it's really, it's a great principle to use, to apply. Applied properly, it could be a W for you all day, every day, twice on Sundays, right? And within that segment, I also talked about the idea of journaling. And look, listen, I didn't go over journaling as much as I really wanted to. But journaling is such a huge part of like my life personally. I've been journaling since I was like a teenager, even before that, right? I had my little journal. I remember it's this little red covered journal. Oh, it's like a maroon burgundy, whatever you want to call it, right? But it was a covered journal. Had like, I think it was like 1994 or something like that. Might have been longer than that. So whatever. But I had this journal. My parents got it for me, and I have no idea if it was because they're just trying to, read it and figure out what I'm thinking. I'm pretty sure it wasn't that, but I remember writing it, I think, every single day, and built up this skill, and because it is a skill to journal, to get your thoughts out, to get the thoughts that you are actually thinking in the way that you're thinking it out on paper. That's kind of a skill there, right? Because a lot of things that we think we're not always able to project it through speech or through writing as well. So, that's kind of as an aside, that's kind of one of the infinite struggle of the writer. How do you get the ideas that you see so clearly in your mind out on paper and convey that to others so that they can join in with you in this whatever that you're writing, right? So it's definitely a skill to build up. But outside of that, journaling, it has been so beneficial to me over the course of over the years, right? I still do it to this day. And then I recognize that a lot of times when I had a lot of different, there was a really rough patch that I had in my life. And the one thing I noticed that was missing was the journaling. I just stopped doing it. I got too busy and I didn't feel like doing it anymore, right? I didn't necessarily see the benefits like I see them now. It's just a very, very beneficial. I mean, look, real talk, my journal is right here. Right, I have my little e-writer, and I write all my stuff in there, whether it be notes or whatever, or just write down what happened in my day so that I can reflect on it, because I do reflect on my day. That's super important. I kind of add that in with my prayers. But I just wanted to go over those things really, really, really quick. Yeah, and I guess just a final note on the idea of incentivizing or punishing, right? What I found is that most people do it without really thinking about it. Most people do it without knowing it. And therein lies the risk. Let me put it that way. There lies the risk. Because if you're doing something that you're not really thinking about, it doesn't take that much to change it, and you really don't know if it's changed, right? So I presented those two random segments so that you can start to think about how you lead and how you parent, how you teach, how you coach, how you lead in general, right? Just so that you can become better at it. Not saying that you're bad or anything like that. I don't know, but it's just giving you some things so that you can improve upon the skills that you may have or accrue the skills that you don't have, right? What's going on, everybody? Hope you're doing well out there. I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese and Lift Studio, and you're listening to the Scowl Method Podcast, your one-stop shop for not only just physical fitness, but mental fitness, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. Let's get to this episode here. Don't gas out. Listen, let's talk about the idea or the proper nutrition and or supplementation around your workout. So before your workouts, what nutrition and what supplementation you want. During your workout, same thing. And then after your workouts, same thing, right? So the idea is this, right? Before your workouts, you want to use nutrition and supplementation to fuel your workouts, right? And I use that term fuel your workouts pretty loosely, okay? During your workouts, you want to it's kind of the same thing. So it's a branch off of the fueling your workouts, but it's going to allow you to continue on. So especially in terms of endurance, right? And then the proper nutrition after your workouts, proper nutrition and supplementation after your workouts is mainly to jumpstart and allow the full process of recovery, okay? So let's start with just in general, before your workouts, what do you want to do here, right? So generally speaking, you want to have a full meal 2 to 3 hours before your workout, right? So if you work out in the evening, that's pretty simple. It's around, maybe lunchtime or something like that. You want to have a lunch, right? But if you are one of those early risers, then you would want to cut that to 30 minutes to 60 minutes before your workout, and then significantly reduce that meal or whatever it may be, right? So the full meal should consist of at least 20, and this is, we're talking 2 to 3 hours before your workout. That full meal should consist of at least 25 grams of protein. 25 grams of protein. You want complex carbs like rice, oats, quinoa, whatever. You know what complex carbs are. And some healthy fats. Don't overload it. I'll explain a little bit more later. But that you want to do 2 to 3 hours before your workout, right? From a supplementation standpoint, this is where I would typically take like blood flow supplements. So maybe like my beetroot, arginine, ginkgo biloba, some type of supplementation with that, because I take it with food. So around lunchtime, that's when I would take my first little stack of supplements, I guess. Well, no, it's not really my first, but that's where I would take blood flow, blood circulation supplements if I were to do any supplementation at all, right? Then about 30 to 60 minutes before workout, I'll go for, and this is what the smaller meal would be. It would be fast digesting carbs. An apple, like a lot of fruit falls under this category. So like a little bit of fruit, maybe a little bit of yogurt with it, maybe a small smoothie of some sort, something like that. But you don't necessarily want to overload on anything, because then you end up feeling weird during your workouts. And given the type of workout it is, that could lead to some really bad stuff and really uncomfortable stuff. Okay, so you want to basically consume something that is light, so you don't cause an upset stomach or anything like that, right? And you typically want to stay away from a lot of the heavy fats closer to your workout, right? So for lunch, it's okay to have some healthy fats. You don't want to overload that 30 minutes before a workout. Just it doesn't lead to good things. Let's just leave it at that, okay? Now, from a supplementation standpoint, you'll want to consume, maybe you could consume a pre-workout, right? I take a pre-workout, but I actually make my own pre-workout just because there's always different brands. And that's not knocking anything or any other brand or anything like that, but it's just, I'd much rather know exactly what's going in there than trusting a label that often is kind of mixed up. That's just me, to each their own. But the base for what you need in terms of supplementation before a workout would be just one or both, or one or two of these things. Number one is creatine. Creatine before, that's base. And then you could throw in some BCAAs as well. I did a whole episode on, wait. I did a whole episode on both, actually, right? Or a whole segment on both. I did a segment on creatine and I did a segment on BCAAs. I'll throw in the links for this episode, or for those episodes in this episode, right? In the show notes and whatnot. But if you're at all confused about what either one of those are, go back to those episodes, right? But that's what I'll put in my pre-workout, right? Caffeine can be good too, right? But there's always a tendency to overdo it. And if you do that for too long, it ends up having some other effects. It's not the best. Let me rephrase that. It's really good, but for me, it is not the best. I don't typically need it anymore. And I found out that the more I took it, the sicker I got. So I was just, let me fall back off of that a little bit. You might be in the same boat. And then, so there's a few suggestions for you there. You might not be. Go ahead, keep taking caffeine in. It's all good, right? But you'll also want to consider the proper fueling for your work. Well, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. So I want to rephrase all of this, right? So for a regular strength workout, you don't necessarily need fuel to jump into a strength workout, like just a good old fashioned strength workout. you don't really need fuel for that, right? So in general, if you have a balanced diet, you're pretty much good to go. As in terms of fueling before your workouts, okay? But then there's also this one thing that you want to consider. That's if you're doing a normal 1 hour workout, right? You don't necessarily need fueling for that. But if you start to do, like, let's just say, a resistance training workout for longer than an hour and a half, and it's just like, well, why would you want to do that? Well, there's power lifters that do that. They work multiple hours. This would be good for them. They would probably need fueling before their workouts, right? And a lot of it is because they're lifting a ton of weight and they're taking more rest. But the fact that it's still pretty intense while they're lifting that particular heavy behinds, like stupid heavy weight, they're going to need that proper fueling, right? The same thing with bodybuilders who often work out twice in a day, right? They're going to need that proper fueling. But for the general folk, the general people, average, you don't really necessarily have to worry about fueling your resistance training workouts, your strength workouts. Now, you might want to consider fuel for like your HIIT workouts, or you might want to consider fuel for your cardio, like your endurance cardio workouts. And that's where the simple carbs come into play majorly, right? And that primarily is because during a HIIT workout, you're burning off your glycogen and you need to replenish those stores, right? Once you burn it off in your muscles, your liver starts to transport that stuff and it starts burning it off in your liver. Well, there's only one more thing that you're really going to start to burn off, and that's muscle. We don't want that, right? So you might want to consider proper fueling before your HIIT workouts with those complex carbs and all that fun. I keep saying complex, those simple carbs, or fast digesting carbs. And the same thing for your endurance runs, right? So any resistance training workout that lasts longer than an hour and a half, you want to consider fueling. Any HIIT workout, you want to consider fueling. And any endurance cardio, you want to consider fueling, okay? So again, and for the general public, you don't necessarily have to worry about it, because for the general public, you probably shouldn't be working out. As far as resistance training goes, you probably shouldn't be working out longer than an hour and some change anyway. It's just you get diminishing returns. So it's unless you I know a lot of people really, 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 really enjoy it, but you really don't get you don't get like multiplicative benefits for working out for 2 hours as opposed to 1. Actually, the sweet spot is I think it was 45 minutes to an hour anyway. So, take that for what it is. So this takes us to proper nutrition and supplementation for during your workouts, okay? And this one is simple. It's water. Agua. El agua? Water. Water? It's liquid. H2O. That's it. It's just that simple, right? Unless you're doing an extended resistance training session, or unless you're doing HIIT or extended cardio, water works. Actually, water's the best. You want to stay hydrated, okay? Now, you might want to consider, especially for a HIIT session, you might want to consider an electrolyte filled or a HIIT session, and probably an endurance cardio session as well. Maybe not so much for an extended resistance training session. It really depends on how much you sweat. So the sweater you get for whatever that workout is, the more you might want to consider some electrolyte solution during your workout. Other than that, water is fine. Water is sufficient, okay? And now also consider BCAAs during your workouts as well. There's some things that especially for endurance athletes, it could aid in your endurance during your workout. It also could reduce the soreness at the end. I talked about that in that episode, in the BCAA episode, right? So I just want you to know, you could use you could drink them, but it's not obligatory. You don't have to, right? Again, most cases, for most people, you'll be fine with just water, okay? Now remember, our post-workout supplement or post-workout nutrition and supplementation is all about recovery. So we want to A, replenish our energy stores, and B, jumpstart the recovery process or the muscle building or muscle protein synthesis process, right? So, and your focus will depend on what type of workout you're doing. So for resistance training, obviously your focus is on protein. Get protein after your workout. Now, what I typically do, I go the protein nutritional supplementation route, right? So I go the supplement route. I do protein shakes. I'll drink protein shakes, but I'll actually start to sip my protein shake towards the end of my workout. And usually most of the time it's during and this is for resistance training workouts, right? I'll start to sip my protein shake just maybe I have 2 sets left of the last exercise of my workout. That's when I'll start it, okay? And that's just so it aids in the recovery process. It starts the recovery process. Again, after a resistance training workout, protein is number 1. That's what you want, right? Now, after a HIIT session, it's actually the focus is a little bit different. The focus actually should be on a combination of simple carbs or fast digesting carbs and complex carbs. So you kind of want to start off with those fast digesting carbs and then shift into more complex carbs. You can mix them up as well. There's no big deal. And then also focus on protein, right? So your main primary focus for recovery after your resistance training program or resistance training workout is protein, and your main focus for recovery after your HIIT session, your main focus there is simple carbs going into complex carbs. Then, as far as a meal goes, it's basically the same before 2 to 3 hours before meal that you would want. So you want at least 25 grams of protein, complex carbs, and healthy fats, right? And so, and that really should cover you. So they should cover you for your fueling, for your workouts if you need it. If you're doing that kind of working out, if you're doing that kind of exercise, and then it will give you the energy and the recovery on the back end, right? So that you can, rebuild muscle, replenish energy stores, and go at it again the next day or next 2 days or something like that, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so that's the quick. Actually, that might be just a quick tip. So there we go. Right, that's how you properly fuel your workouts. What nutrition supplementation do you need during your workouts? Really, it's just water. Remember, and what you can do, what you can eat and ingest, and what you could take for after your workouts so that you can recover and recover well. All right, let's keep it going. All right, so in previous episodes, quite a few of them, I talked about this idea of inflammation, right? And I talked about inflammation in a sense that, how do we avoid certain types of inflammation? But I also mentioned that inflammation can be a good thing too, as well, right? And we don't necessarily want to blunt the good inflammation response. But I kind of fell into this whole idea of good versus bad inflammation. And let me just say that I typically don't think of it in that way. And I'll explain why, and I'll break it down a little bit. But I want to kind of, for lack of better terms, I want to nerd out real quick, right? What is inflammation, though? Right? When we say inflammation, what do we mean, right? So we mean it's a biological response that occurs when the body's immune system reacts to harmful stimuli, such as pathogens, damaged cells, or irritants. So think about, like pathogens, viruses and bacteria, right? Damaged cells, which also could be dead cells, right? That happens naturally, not naturally, but it happens through like exercise, right? Movement, things like that, or trauma, injury, things like that, right? And then, or irritants, and that's a kind of a catch-all phrase there that covers say environmental factors like chemicals and things, and maybe preservatives, or don't get me started yet, but I will get to that point, right? But those would be other irritants like toxins, right? So how does it work? How does this inflammatory process work? And it kind of goes in like 5 or 6 different steps, right? So the first stage is a recognition stage, right? This is when the harmful stimuli is first detected, and your body triggers an immune response, and the immune cells, I think they're called dendritic cells and macrophages, recognize the harmful stimuli through receptors that bind to molecules associated with those pathogens or damaged tissue or those damaged cells, right? So let me say that a little bit more clearly, right? So these cells go out and they see the harmful cells, the harmful cells that are causing trauma, right? They're causing a whole bunch of mess inside of your body, and these cells figure out like, oh, here they go. This is what we we're gonna have to clean this up, right? So you have like, they're almost like alert cells, right? Like they're like the security guards of your body, right? They're sitting there like, okay, they just trooping, right? They're just walking through, trying to figure out what's going on. And they see somebody that doesn't belong, they're just like, alert, they gotta go, right? So then the next thing is, what happens is, your body releases what these things are called inflammatory mediators, okay? These dendritic cells and macrophages release signaling molecules called inflammatory mediators. These are the cytokines, histamines, and the like, right? Cytokines is a big one, though, and we'll talk about that more later. And they help coordinate the body's response to injury or infection, okay? The next thing that happens then, your blood vessels change, right? Your blood vessels dilate or widen, and they also become more permeable, meaning more immune cells and proteins can go through the blood vessels into the tissues that are affected, okay? And then the next thing happens, it's called immune cell activation. You get additional immune cells that get activated. These are the neutrophils and these are the lymphocytes, right? And they're shot to the area of, inflammation. Because mind you, the signal was already sent out. We need increased blood flow to this area because there's damage or bacteria or some other thing here. So the inflammation is the actual blood flowing to that area, right? So that's where you think about it, the symptoms of inflammation, right? You get heat from the area because blood flow is moving there. You get swelling because the fluid is moving there, right? So everything is being shuttled to that area. And a lot of times, because you get the swelling, you also get like pain because it presses up against your nerve endings. So that's an inflammatory response. But what happens is those initial immune cells send out the signal like, hey, we need to send all this stuff here because of this alert. All right, we got to send everybody here. All right. So then that's when the immune cells get there. The neutrophils and the lymphocytes are shot into that area of inflammation. And they are the cleaners. They clear out pathogens, dead or damaged cells, and they initiate tissue repair. Okay. Then you have this next process called phagocytosis. This is when the immune cells engulf and ingest the pathogens, debris, and dead cells. I think that's the coolest part, right? So I think that's what your T cells and your B cells do, right? They basically take these bad cells and jack them up, for lack of better terms. They bodies, right, to whatever that pathogen or whatever that damaged or dead cell is, right? And then the final closing of this process is basically you get resolution and healing. So once the harmful stimuli is eliminated, the body releases anti-inflammatory signals that and the affected areas basically start to heal. Immune cells then at that point, so the security guards that we saw from the very beginning, the dendritic cells and the macrophages, what they do basically, either if they're alive still, they basically just go back into a resting period where they're going back on security duty. They're back on desk duty, so they're looking around, they're just waiting, right? Or if they happen to not have made it through the battle, they get cleared away. Okay. So as an aside to all this, so that's how the process works. But as an aside to all of this, I have this thought, and I'm just kind of been mulling it over. Now, I'm not sure there are any studies that back this up at all. And I don't, so don't take don't take this as a recommendation, and don't take this as, oh, I know for a fact. I do not. It's just me thinking in general, right? Now, if you know of any studies that will actually back up what I'm about to say, then please let me know, because I think this part is very interesting. But I can see how, I can see why exogenous testosterone injections, or right, I could see how that works in terms of muscle building, or at least one of the ways that it could work in muscle building, right? Because, think about it, the neutrophils, in terms of muscle building, what these things do, right? Because your body has an immune response to bacteria or virus, right? That's infection. It has an immune response to other chemicals and things like that don't belong, like toxins in your body, and that can come from environmental factors, food factors, all that fun stuff. But it also you have an immune response to exercise, to working out, because you could cause small little micro tears in your muscles, right? So you have an immune response to actual trauma to the tissue. So understanding that these cells play a role in remodeling the muscle tissue and growing more muscle. So what the neutrophils do is that they send out the signal for muscle repair. Macrophages oversee the general process, so to speak, and they also release cytokines, which promote tissue healing and remodeling. So all three of those cells are affected by testosterone. Testosterone can enhance the activity and the production of these cells in particular, which means, think about it. If you have more activity from those cells, you basically have more muscle tissue repair. And if you have more muscle tissue repair, then you have faster recovery and potentially more muscle protein synthesis and more muscle, which, again, I'm just kind of rapping a little bit, and this is just a thought process. Again, not backed by studies or anything like that, but I'm just thinking my way through this one a little bit, right? It just seems like there's a way for, it just makes sense to me, primarily because, you see these guys who are on something, right, and they're working out for hours upon hours without fail, and they put on muscle like it's no one's business, and it's like it's easy. They recover faster. They're obviously tearing down muscle tissue. So it's there has to be some part of that process that they're able to recover and heal faster. But this is part of the recovering and healing process. So the macrophages, the neutrophils, and the cytokines are important in that process. So, just logically thinking about it, I can see a pathway in which extra testosterone means extra immune cells. But here's the kicker. The kicker is, at least now I've seen this on one study, extra testosterone coming from outside of your body actually suppresses your immune system. So whereas it might promote growth in the neutrophils, in the macrophages, and the cytokines, it'll actually suppress the production and activity of your T cells and your B cells. Those are the ones that are responsible for doing all the killing. They're the ones that are responsible for taking out all of the damaged cells or the bacteria, infection, or anything like that. So I think it's not an easy one for one, and it seems to be a complex situation. But I can kind of see a pathway in which, oh, okay, that's how the muscle building actually happens, right? Set aside all the the other anabolic stuff, right? Just from a purely an immune system state, I think that's one part in which that works for the muscle building side, right? Now, I don't even really say that because that's not necessarily a case for you to go out and get testosterone injections, not at all. But I say for two reasons. One reason is that this makes sense to me because I think this is why females have some form of testosterone, right? Obviously for the muscle building part, but they're not able to build as much muscle in a general sense, right? But I think also for an immune system setup, I think that certain amount of testosterone is beneficial because, again, the testosterone kind of is responsible for the growth and the activity of those cells. At least it can be linked to high activity of them, neutrophils, macrophages, and cytokines, right? So it's all kind of like a puzzle that's kind of coming together here, right? And hopefully I stated my point really clear. But the second thing that I'm really concerned about concerning this, the second point is that while I'm not promoting getting testosterone injections, what I am promoting is having a healthy and adequate level of testosterone. So here's just another thing against low T, right? And I did a whole episode on that, and I didn't even talk about any of that. Well, I might have talked about a little bit about this. But adequate levels of testosterone almost ensures that you have good neutrophil, macrophage, cytokine production. And I think that's decent, right? Because that ensures that you have a strong immune system and a pretty decent muscle building response. So I think that's just another data point to say, keep your T up, right? But and outside of that too, right? This is another kind of I'm not telling you to go out and get injections or anything like that, because actually that would be, whereas extra testosterone lowers your T cells and B cells, regular exercise has been shown to increase your T cells and B cells. So just by regularly exercising, here we go again, just by regularly exercising, you can have adequate testosterone levels, you can increase your T cell and B cell activity, you can increase your muscle mass, you can improve your health. Simple exercise, resistance training, yet again, right? So if anything, I'm just basically talking all around, just saying, hey, get out there and lift some weights, for lack of better terms, right? Because that's what, and that's not the entirety of it, but that's part of what exercising does for your immune system. That's how it gets boosted. That's how you get your weight up, right? And so, let me not stay there too long, but that's the idea. But the thing is, many people tend to separate this idea of they separate good versus bad inflammation, and where they say good inflammation is only an acute response and bad inflammation is a prolonged chronic condition, right? And then it's I used to look at it that way, but I tend to look at it this way instead. And I know there are a bunch of different doctors that will back me up on this one. Again, not a doctor, but I tend to look at inflammation as a thing unto itself. So inflammation is inflammation. It's not good or bad. It's just what is it in response to? That thing that it's in response to is either good or bad. For instance, right? You have you have the process of inflammation that I just listed out earlier, right? You have that whole process going on. The process is pretty much the same though, whether you're exercising or whether you have autoimmune disease. It's the same process, right? So I don't see inflammation as good or bad. I see either the exercise as good or bad or the autoimmune disease as good or bad. Obviously, autoimmune disease I see as bad and exercise I see as good, right? So I look at it that way, right? Because the whole idea is this, right? You don't want to be inflamed past your ability to clean, repair, and heal. I'll repeat that. You don't want to be inflamed past your ability to clean, repair, or heal. Okay. Now, there are a number of different things that can cause that, right? Not only just disease in general, but like over exercise, over too much of a good thing can cause that. So over exercising can cause that, right? That's overtraining. And note, when you hit a state of overtraining, you end up getting sick, right? Why? Because you're basically constantly, you're inflamed beyond your ability to clean, repair, and heal. And that's where a whole plethora of other diseases and conditions and maladies come from, right? So you don't want to be inflamed past your ability to clean, repair, and heal. And what causes that, though, right? So now we're going to go into what most call bad inflammation. But what causes bad inflammation, right? We already know good inflammation is mostly exercise, right? And if you have a healthy immune system and you're going out places and you're doing things, you're going to get inflamed every now and again because people get sick and things like that happen. But like that's one thing. But that chronic, what they call chronic bad inflammation, or what I would call, bad inflammation sources, right? When you get inflammation from bad sources, what causes that? So autoimmune disease, I just mentioned, is a big one. It's a huge one, right? And I mean, autoimmune disease is it sucks, right? Like, for lack of better terms, it sucks. Whether it's, so basically what happens with autoimmune disease is your body is fighting itself, okay? And in that, I mean, you'll become inflamed because your body starts the inflammatory response. So those very beginning cells that I talked about, right? Those neutrophils and macrophages from the jump. I'm sorry, no, the dendritic cells and the macrophages from the jump, they will act, and they're the security guards, right? But what they'll see is some part of your body that's normal and completely healthy, and they'll look at that part of the body as the enemy, and they'll jumpstart the inflammatory response, and they'll jumpstart the cleanup process and all that fun stuff on a perfectly healthy and perfectly fine portion of your body. Now, there's some research that says that, well, maybe there's a possibility that portion of your body isn't healthy and isn't perfectly normal, and that's why your body continuously responds to it. I don't know enough to tell you which way or the other to go with that, but I've done a lot of research, probably more than the average person, on autoimmune disease in general, because for as long as I've known my wife, she's had autoimmune disease, and we've had to go through a plethora of different issues and things like that to make sure that she's able to live, right? And in those times, I've learned quite a bit about how our bodies work, and I've dug into the research on a lot of different things, trying to understand how she works and how we can help her be better. And thankfully, thank God, we are at a point, or she's at a point, where this is probably the best she's been in her life. She's in the best shape of her life. Her autoimmune disease, and that's what she has in general, is just generally autoimmune disease, which stinks because it can appear as ITP, MS, lupus, you name it, rheumatoid arthritis, you name it. It could appear that way because her body produces these antibodies that attack her, right? So we've had to deal with symptoms of all of those things over the years. Not fun at all. But again, thank God she's in the best health she's ever been in, right? And a lot of that comes through the process of, cleaning up your diet, exercising, doing these things, right? Trying to limit the toxins that enter your body, changes in the environment to make sure that you're not constantly attacking yourself. Like, things like that help out tremendously. But But I digress. Let me pull back a little bit. So we don't know I don't know necessarily whether it's your body, if you have autoimmune disease, if your body is actually correctly identifying something that's off, or if the receptors are off. I don't know, but at the end of the day, autoimmune disease is a huge cause of inflammation, right? Like I said, rheumatoid arthritis attacks the joints and the connective tissue. Lupus attacks your tissues and your organs, right? MS attacks the nerve coverings of your central nervous system, which stinks as well. ITP attacks your platelets. Like, there's so many portions of your body that you would think are otherwise healthy that get attacked by these security guards, basically, who are just sitting there. They were a little overzealous. Let's just say that. So if you have autoimmune disease, that is a huge cause of inflammation ongoing, right? Another one is a terrible diet, right? Look, if you have a terrible diet, I mean, your body essentially treats the unhealthy food components as a stressor. So it treats it as a toxin, something that doesn't belong in the body, right? Now, this is a twofold thing, right? You could think about like saturated and trans fats, right? You could think about overly processed foods. You could think about refined sugars and things like that. Those things typically lead to chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation because you're consistently feeding your body that stuff, and your body is consistently attacking it because it doesn't belong. Another big thing, though, is also these preservatives and chemicals that they typically put in foods. Look, think what you want about it, but half of that stuff doesn't belong in our body. The crazy thing about it is there's a whole list of things that don't belong in our bodies, but for some reason in America, we allow it. And in other countries, there's like a gazillion banned substances on that list that we apparently consume every day. So make of that what you will. Point is, those chemicals that don't belong in our foods, those dyes, like red dyes, blue dyes, all that doesn't belong in our body, right? And I'm not going to sound like some flighty hocus pocus, health guru or anything like that. It's just a fact of the matter. It's as simple as that. It doesn't belong in our body, so our body responds negatively towards it, right? So a lot of people can reduce their inflammation or reduce their bad inflammation just by cleaning up their diet, right? And obviously, smoking is terrible for you. Don't do it. Like, I don't know how many times I got to say that, but just don't do it. Like, there's literally no benefit to it at all whatsoever. None, zero, zilch, nada, nothing. Okay, so don't smoke. Another thing is there are also environmental factors that I can't necessarily quantify myself, but you got to worry about those as well, right? Like, the quality of our air, the quality of our water, things like that, right? So those things will also, invade our system, and we treat it as a virus or bacteria or something like that. We have an inflammatory response because of it, okay? So those are the things that cause it, right? And we already know I already went over what we could do for good inflammation, right? So the whole idea here is, right, inflammation by itself is not a good or a bad thing. It's always just a response, right? It's always a response to what's going on, right? So if you have a lot of inflammation all the time, then you might want to get some things checked out, right? You might want to go over your entire life with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that you're just not simply ingesting something. Make sure that, you potentially don't have some autoimmune disease. You potentially don't have other conditions and things like that going on. Because one thing I do agree with those folks who think, there's good and bad inflammation. They do say that bad inflammation is really bad. Like, chronic inflammation is bad for you. You should not be inflamed all the time. I agree with them on that. You should not be. Even if you exercise a lot, like let's just say you exercise 5 days a week, that's still acute. That's not chronic. Like chronic inflammation is what happens when you overtrain, right? Where it's just like, yo, like it is not healing. Again, you don't want you don't want to kind of outkick your coverage here, right? Like you don't want to work past your ability to clean, repair, and heal, right? So again, and I'm saying, I said it, maybe that was the fourth time I said it because I want you to understand that if you don't take anything else from this, take it take that, right? Because that's inflammation that just won't go away, and it's not good for you long term. Okay, so that's inflammation. That's what it is in a nutshell. Or maybe not a nutshell. And hopefully we got a little bit of chance to nerd out a little bit, but yeah. So I just wanted to clarify that idea for y'all. Hopefully it gave you a little bit to work with, a little bit of ideas. And look, go clean up your diet. If you have a terrible diet, clean that mess up. Clean up your diet. Go out and exercise, please. For the love of everything that's holy and true, go out and exercise. Go home and exercise. Get some dumbbells, do some push-ups, get some bands. I don't care, but exercise, please, because this is and just a little bit of a tangent. And I'm struggling with it, right? Because I'm struggling with this idea of the injectables. And I started to talk about it a little bit when it comes to the testosterone injections. But the whole idea is eventually I'm getting to a point where I have to do an episode about the Ozempics and about the Wegovy's and about the semaglutides and tirzepatide, all that stuff, all the peptides, all the steroids, all this stuff. Like, eventually I'm get to a point where I do an episode on that. I just don't know exactly where I fall on a lot of that stuff anymore. And I have reasons. So I'll explain it. But why am I mentioning that now? I'm mentioning that now because I don't want anybody to go out. My point is exercise. Whether you're doing an injectable or not, yeah, you gotta exercise. Like, please don't depend on some pharmaceutical anything to make your life 100% better for anything. Now, if you are not able to exercise, that's a different story. But the vast majority of people are. Please go out there and get some work in. Get some work in. Yeah. So that'll close us out. All right. Well, there we are. Episode 15 now is done in the books, right? I hope this time was enjoyable with you. I hope I didn't take too much of your time this time. I know we didn't have the random topic. There's a whole bunch of things I want to talk about too, but I really just wanted to drop in on this Christmas episode and just give y'all a little pump up. Give y'all a little bit of information. Take it and run. But you know what? The general idea is, look, I appreciate y'all. This has been an interesting year, so I want to close out a little bit just kind of reflecting on the year a little bit, right? I'm not going to take too much more of your time. But I mean, this year has been challenging in a lot of respects, right? It's been challenging, but I've been able to see a lot of growth, like not just within like the business or anything like that, but like within myself. I've learned a lot from a lot of different people. I've had the pleasure of meeting more people than I think I've met in any other point in time in my life, and just to be able to hear their stories and to see where the decisions that they made and how much better they are on the back end of some of those decisions that they made. Like, it might sound a little cryptic, but I just feel incredibly blessed this year, despite all of the struggles and despite all of the troubles that came my way in this year. And it was a lot. It was a lot. And I'm incredibly proud of of just the people that I'm connected to, right? Not necessarily of myself. I'm not, but the people I'm connected to, they've done a great job, just throughout the year of becoming better, right? And it's a great thing for me to see, especially as a coach, as a trainer, as a father, as a husband. It is a great thing to see the majority of the people that you are connected to succeed and grow. I don't take that lightly. It's a great thing to see. So I appreciate everybody who's along with me on this ride. I appreciate everybody who I'm connected to, who kind of let me into their lives, right? I appreciate that. And again, this year's been awesome. It's awesome. I even take the down, lower parts, the valleys as learning experiences, right? Because I learned a lot. And look, I was able to start this podcast. I was able to start the YouTube. I finally started to get active on social media because I kind of can't stand social media, but I actually kind of like TikTok, believe it or not. Now, watch this, right? I put that out there like, oh yeah, I kind of like TikTok, and the government's going to shut it down, right? It's just like, come on, y'all. Yeah, of course y'all would. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to kind of, like I said, reflect a little bit. And I'm just rapping. There ain't nothing else I got to say. It's the end of the year. Listen, so I hope y'all do well. I hope y'all make it. Next year, I don't do New Year's resolutions, by the way. It's just a continuation of the game plan that was set years ago. So we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep striving to achieve that vision. But also understand that it's a goal, it's a target, but it's not the end all be all. There's going to be a lot of learning along the way. That's the hope. That's the plan. So we're just going to round out this episode with my usual. I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese and Lift Studio, and you just got finished listening to the Scowl Method Podcast, your one-stop shop for not only physical fitness, but mental fitness, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. I'll see y'all next year.